Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to talk about the movies. I am Skye Jethani. I'm here, as always, with Josh Lindsey.
Hey, everybody.
This is episode 5 of the movie proposal. Thanks for joining us again. We have a very interesting episode that we will get into in a minute. But just a reminder, if you're listening to this, at least when it first came out, it's because you've subscribed to the Phil Vischer Patreon page, and we appreciate your support. Keeps the Phil Vischer podcast going, and eventually this one as well. Share it with your friends, subscribe at a higher rate, do whatever it takes. I understand that a t-shirt was created after the last Phil Vischer podcast that you can now also purchase.
I've ordered mine.
You did?
Yeah.
I just saw it this morning. I haven't gotten one. It's worth getting. We've been wanting that for years, so thank you, Jason, for putting that together. For those of you uninitiated in the Movie Proposal podcast, the way this works is it's a wedding themed. So every episode we talk about something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. So Josh, before we get into the longer review of a newer movie this week, what is your something old that you wanted to put out there for people to remember and perhaps watch again?
Okay, so looking back at some of my favorite films, today we're talking about a documentary. And so one of my favorite documentaries is Hands on Hardbody.
Okay.
Are you familiar with this one?
No, but it's kind of awkward given the film we're going to be talking about later.
Here it goes. So a pastor friend of mine, I was visiting him in Texas. He said, we need to go see this movie. And so, of course, I had the same reaction. I mean, this doesn't seem like a movie I should see, let alone a pastor recommending that I go see this film.
Hands on a Hardbody.
1997. It's a documentary.
It up right now.
It's about a small town in Texas, a dealership that has a truck.
Oh, I know this now.
Right. So people, put their names in. It's a lottery. I think they draw 24 names, and those 24 contestants stand with their hand on the truck, the hard body. Last man standing or last person standing wins the truck. It's a documentary. It's a little slow at the beginning, but it's super entertaining. They follow a handful of the contestants. All of them have a very compelling reason for wanting and needing a truck. Mm-hmm. It's not only, this goes on for days. So not only is it a physical test, it is a mental.
They get bathroom breaks?
Yeah. Once I think it's once every 3 hours, they get 10 minutes to go to the bathroom. And then once every so many hours, they get like a half hour to do something. So,
okay.
But I mean, this is literally nonstop. I mean, this goes on for days, and people just drop off. But everyone's convinced. Everyone is convinced they're going to win the truck. Mm-hmm. I recommend anyone check this out if you enjoy documentaries. This is, today there's a lot of like American Gladiator type stuff, and this is 1997. But if you enjoy that, the kind of test of the will, great film.
Okay. Hands on a hard body. I'm tempted. So my something old, I learned yesterday, I believe it was, Gene Wilder passed away. Mm-hmm. And just a great comedic actor. And for those of you who are young and don't know much of his work, you might recall that he was the original Willy Wonka before
Johnny
Depp. He was in a number of Mel Brooks movies. He did a number of movies with Richard Pryor. But my favorite, and I'm a little bit hesitant to recommend it because there's always off-color humor and inappropriate things. People, oh, you're a Christian.
Is it Running Scared?
No, I love Young Frankenstein.
Oh, that's a great one.
It is a great movie. It's shot in black and white. It's hysterically funny. I always really like Gene Wilder. In fact, driving in today to do this podcast, I was listening to an old interview with him. Just such a gracious man and kind and humble. He said that he loved acting, but he hated the movie business.
Okay.
And it was just he's a really endearing character, and I'm gonna miss his comedy and his films. And so an old classic, Young Frankenstein. Halloween's not that far away. It'd be something worth watching and laughing about. I remember Igor.
Yeah, with the hump on the back.
Right, Igor. Oh, it was great. It's just so classic Mel Brooks. And I didn't know this, but Gene Wilder actually is the one who came up with that story and wrote most of it.
Really?
Yeah, and even had it cast before Mel Brooks got on board.
Okay.
So it's really a Gene Wilder movie. But anyway, if you want to laugh.
I just watched a clip of Gene Wilder on Larry King where he was saying it was his idea, Gene Wilder's idea, for Willy Wonka to walk out with a cane with a limp, and then the cane got stuck in the bricks, and then he falls forward, but then does a somersault. And he said he would not do the film unless they did that. And his whole point was, from then on, the audience would never know whether to believe him or not.
Yeah.
And the director said, "Are you saying you won't do this unless we put this in the film?" He says, "That's what I'm saying." It's like, all right, done. It's in the movie. So
well, there you go. Yeah, he's a really interesting character. Great guy. Okay, that's our something old. Really quick little segment there. Now, the majority of our time we want to spend on something new, and we try to engage a variety of films. We've done Christian movies, we've done blockbuster movies, we've done small independent movies. This week, we've chosen a documentary, and the timing is rather interesting, given the news that has come out. I'm kind of a political junkie. I love documentaries. I was always looking forward to seeing this film, but we decided to watch the movie Wiener.
yes, we did.
About Anthony Weiner, the disgraced New York congressman. Josh, why don't you read the description of the movie, and then we'll kind of unpack the story a little bit before we offer our proposals.
Okay, so Wiener, the documentary, is an examination of disgraced New York Congressman Anthony Weiner's mayoral campaign and the landscape of today's political landscape.
All right, that doesn't offer a ton of detail.
No, it doesn't.
So let me fill in a little bit, jump in as you want. So Anthony Weiner was a congressman from, I believe, Queens, and had a reputation for being kind of a pit bull, a really aggressive Democrat, liberal, New York, and an advocate for the downtrodden and all that, and kind of a rising star in Congress. And in 2011, he was embroiled in a scandal that involved inappropriate photographs that were being sent to women via his Twitter account that he initially denied were him, and later it came out that indeed these pictures were of him and parts of his anatomy, which you couldn't write this because, of course, his last name is Wiener. But it turns out he was doing this kind of stuff, and he ended up resigning in disgrace from Congress. He laid low for, I think, about 2 years, and then decided he wanted to have a political comeback and decided to run for mayor of New York. Adding a wrinkle to the whole thing is the fact that he's married to Huma Abedin, who is Hillary Clinton's right-hand woman and has been for years and years and years, was her chief of staff at the State Department when she was Secretary of State, is like a co-chairman or something or other of her campaign for president right now. So very high profile, very powerful, very successful woman is Anthony Weiner's wife. So this documentary is about his mayoral campaign, which involves his wife very much, and his desire to kind of overcome the scandal. And so anyway, you want to take it from there and kind of...
Well, sure. Well, here's my proposal for it. Okay. So I propose that Wiener is an entertaining yet ultimately sad case study of narcissism. I chose to steer away from any puns. I just want to get that out right now that I was...
Let's see if you can continue throughout the rest of the podcast. That's right. That's your challenge.
But one, it was a great film. It was very entertaining. I was very engaged. I enjoyed it. I wanted to see what I did. I assumed the ending. It seemed pretty obvious what was going to happen, but I wanted to see how it was going to unfold. The filmmakers got what seemed to be unprecedented access to someone running for mayor, yet someone who is struggling with not just the issues of becoming mayor, but his past, scandal that he had to deal with, because that's what the focus was. And then in addition to that, see how it affected his marriage, to see that his wife was actually, like, on camera struggling with the idea of trying to be a supportive wife, yet at the same time embarrassed, not just by the scandal and the fact that he's running for mayor, but now there's a whole documentary about the whole thing. So it was fascinating. Ultimately, it was very sad because you were watching Huma get embarrassed, and
it's painful.
Very painful. So it's tough to call this simply just entertaining when you're watching human lives just get destroyed in front of you. And in light of what was happening, and if it was just a documentary, and if I saw it when it came out in theaters, it would have been one thing. But I watched this, I finished it yesterday in the midst of the news of there's a new sex scandal with Wiener, and his wife just left him. So the whole thing is very sad. And but I did call it a case study of narcissism because that's what the theme of it was to me.
Yeah.
Was he was all about himself, which ultimately led to the downfall of his campaign and ultimately his marriage.
Yeah, it was kind of striking. And the spoiler alerts, if you care about this documentary and you don't want to be spoiled, you might want to listen to this after you've seen the movie. He begins his mayoral candidacy, and it's off to a great start. He's polling really high. People love him. His reputation as an advocate for the downtrodden kind of lifts him in the polls, and everyone's kind of dismissing the whole mess he got involved in earlier with the tweeting and all that. Well, in the midst of the campaign, he does it again, and he gets busted again, and it comes out again that he's still doing this, despite having told everybody that he's not engaged with women on Twitter anymore.
Technically, it happened not during the campaign, but during the time prior to the campaign that he said he had stopped.
Right.
So they caught him in a lie that was from like a year or two ago.
Right. So but the point is he didn't stop the bad behavior.
Right.
And it destroyed his campaign. And that's when you really see the humiliation of his wife and he's trying to pick up the pieces. And this week we learned that it is still going on and his wife's finally decided to leave him. So in that regard, it's really tragic. He made a point in the documentary, I forget when it occurred, or before or after it's revealed he's still sending these kinds of messages. But he made the point that he never met these women. Mm-hmm. He didn't have an actual adulterous affair with any of these women. He didn't engage in any illegal activity like Elliot Spitzer, for example, another New York politician who was busted for prostitution. He didn't engage with anybody who was underage or in any way, unethical, unlike, or even in a power structure like Bill Clinton with Monica Lewinsky, where it's a boss and an intern. Like none of that going on. So he kind of raised the question, what's the big deal here? Like, yeah, he did something that some people think is kind of inappropriate and weird, but if he had just flat out committed adultery, you can make a case that he wouldn't have faced as much ridicule from people or the press as merely sending kind of gross pictures of himself in his underwear via Twitter. So is it just that this was a new form of sexual scandal and it was social media and it was kind of just new fodder for the press that made it so, or was it, he even made this point, is it the fact that his name is Wiener that just gave this so much fuel for the comedians and for the press that's ultimately what brought down, if his name was Smith, would it have just been a flash in the pan kind of thing and it would have been over and everyone would have dropped it?
Maybe. What I thought was fascinating was the exchange between him and an individual in I guess it was a deli of sorts.
Oh, yeah.
Because the point you were making, I think is fascinating that, it wasn't just an affair where it just would have kind of blown over. Where here, I mean, the word that was brought up a lot was pervert and sicko, and you have an addiction and things like that, which could be true towards someone who had a traditional affair, right? But here they applied it to him because of his method of infidelity. But the individual in the deli was literally saying, my sins are not as bad as your sins. And so just the perspective is that he was a popular congressman, that he apparently did a lot of good for people. He had a lot of fans. But this one thing, which is terrible, was viewed to be ultimately worse than maybe an affair because of the way I think people might, I don't know how they interpret it, and the method of what he was doing was something maybe they were unfamiliar with, or maybe it was too close to home because it was social media and the access that people have to things like pornography and that kind of stuff. It was more disturbing to them because of the method, I think, which is why they were so angry at him and untrusting of him.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's part of I'm thinking back to the 90s with Bill Clinton and his scandal with Monica Lewinsky. He certainly wasn't the first or only president who had an adulterous relationship. I mean, Jack Kennedy, for example, famously, and others, we didn't know about it at the time. But some people who were really upset with Bill Clinton, it wasn't just that he was unfaithful to his wife. It was how careless he was. I mean, you're president of the United States and you are engaging in this kind of behavior with an intern. That is that is just reckless and careless and stupid. Like, wouldn't you have more judgment than to be that? And I think similarly with Anthony Weiner, it's like, dude, you're sending pictures of yourself under the code name Carlos Danger to women via Twitter. Like, are you that stupid? Like, is it? It's a failure of judgment. And then when he lied about it, and he was caught in the lies, it only added to this impression that this guy isn't trustworthy and he doesn't have the judgment to be given control of an entire city like New York. So I don't think it was necessarily just the sexual infidelity, because there's so many politicians now who have been there and done that. It was the nature of the infidelity and what it said about his character. And I think your proposal is on target. It does reveal a narcissism. And there's so many layers to this, which is, for me, here's my proposal. I think what I found, not redemptive, but what I found illuminating about this documentary, I propose, is that what you see in Anthony Weiner is a malady that, frankly, I've seen in a lot of megachurch pastors. I know that sounds crazy, but it isn't about, sexual misconduct online or anything like that. It's that highly successful, fame-driven positions tend to breed addictive behaviors. And I'll go to a story that we did in Leadership Journal a number of years ago. Sally Morgenthaler wrote this article for us. Some of you may know that name. Sally Morgenthaler has written a lot of books about worship ministries, and she's been a speaker in a lot of places on worship ministries of the church. Her backstory was that her husband had been a youth pastor at a church, I believe in California, and at some point in his ministry, it turned out that he was having an inappropriate relationship with some of the underage girls in the youth ministry, which is just horrific on multiple levels. Long story short, he ended up in prison for this behavior, destroyed his marriage, destroyed his family. Years later, Sally wrote an article for us reflecting on that whole thing. And it's still up online. I highly recommend you go read it at Christianity Today. But the title of her article was, "Does Ministry Fuel Addictive Behavior?" And she makes a case, compellingly, I think, using research from psychologists and others, that the way we do ministry in the United States so isolates pastors and so puts them on a pedestal, especially in large churches where there's a lot of fame and a lot of people are dependent on that one personality to do everything, that it actually drives pastors into addictive behaviors, not just sexual impropriety, but all kinds of other things. And I think you see that in Anthony Weiner, that the very thing that made him a successful politician, his narcissism, his fragile ego, his need for applause and approval, is also what probably fueled this really destructive sexual behavior online, and apparently hasn't been dealt with to this day. It's still going on. And then the other layer to this is, why would you let these cameras follow you and your family in the most intimate conversations about the most just sensitive things? And you can tell, like, he wants the cameras there. He needs that attention. And you almost feel like you're part of his infidelity.
Which, and you bring up a ton of great points. The last point you just made is what makes this documentary so fascinating, is that you're watching this, and at moments you ask yourself, I can't believe he's letting them film this.
Yeah.
At the very end, the filmmakers ask him point blank, why did you let us film you?
Yeah.
And there was a long pause. They never showed him answering it anyway. It just ended, instead of him giving an answer, it just ended with a photographer taking headshots of him on the street and him getting recognized by a little boy who thought, who knew Anthony Weiner, was as excited as if he had seen some movie star celebrity and asked to get pictures taken with him. And that's how it ended, right?
Yeah.
Because he is.
He's a celebrity.
He's a celebrity, and he's narcissistic, and he believes he can get away with it, and he's deserving, and which is ultimately, I think what's sad about it, because of how it affects everyone around him. But at the same time, setting what happened to Huma aside, fascinatingly entertaining to watch this go down.
I don't know if this is a fair comparison. I feel like, to take it out of the realm of sexual addiction and put it more in an alcohol addiction, it's like having somebody who's a confessed alcoholic try to overcome his alcoholism by launching his own winery.
There you go.
and you're asked to come and be part of launching this winery, and you're like, dude, you're addicted to this stuff. You need to get away from it.
Right.
You don't need more of it. And so, like, here's an example. This might upset some of our listeners depending on your church history and all that, but there have been a number of high profile large church pastors who have had very public falls from the heights, right? Sometimes for sexual impropriety, sometimes for other, and it's striking to me which ones decide to get out of the spotlight, to heal their lives, their marriages, their relationships, to do a lot of introspection and healing out, and how many of them are right back in the spotlight, like they cannot keep themselves away. And I could name some names. I don't really want to go there, but there's two in particular that come to mind in the last 4 or 5 years who have had dramatic falls where their churches imploded, where their marriages and lives imploded. And within a matter of weeks, they were back in the spotlight. They were back speaking at conferences. They were back on television. They were back leading a church because they just couldn't not have that. And I thought that's exactly what you're seeing with Anthony Weiner, is he can't survive without the attention.
Yeah.
And, that's a sign of a really unhealthy, broken person. And just like those qualities are also what made him an effective politician, in some cases, those same qualities are what make people such a charismatic church leader. So part of my thing, and this is just, I'm filtering it through my own experience, if you want to get some kind of graphic outside the church example of an unhealthy leader, watch the Wiener documentary, because it's there. People who are not self-reflective enough, who can't be alone, who tell people what they want to hear, who desperately need to be liked, and are oblivious to the pain it's causing to those closest to them.
Yeah.
That was the most difficult part of the whole thing, is watching his wife.
There was only one moment in the film where he actually made a decision on her behalf to protect her. The rest of the time, he seemed oblivious to her clearly suffering embarrassment while cameras are filming her.
Yeah. And the only thing I kept thinking about with Huma was, I'm kind of glad she's so close to Hillary Clinton.
Why is that?
Because she's been through it.
Oh, I get it. She can relate.
She can relate. Maybe there's a support group there. I don't know.
Right.
But it was just painful to watch while being outrageously entertaining.
I do. There's, like you said, there are tons of layers to this, and we obviously don't have time to get into it all. But definitely worth seeing if you like the political side and documentaries, I think.
And I do wonder if the current campaign for president, what you could infer from this documentary. Donald Trump is another one of these characters who loves the attention, loves cameras. Although for him, I don't think there's anything he could do that would make people surprised.
But he admitted that, didn't he? He said, I could kill people and my supporters would still.
Right. But it's. I mean, we can make this about Anthony Weiner, or we can make it about Donald Trump, or make it about politics. But is there something about our society in general and the media that is breeding, just like Sally Morgenthaler's point of the way we do ministry actually create circumstances in which pastors become addicts? Mm-hmm. Is there something about the way as a culture we do media and politics, everything, that actually rewards and creates these kinds of disastrous leaders for us? I don't know. It's a fascinating little glimpse into the American political world.
I do, just an interesting tidbit. I have a cousin-in-law who created Tweet Congress, and it's a non-for-profit.
Is that a website too?
I'm not sure, but he created this as a way to create dialogue between politicians, primarily congressmen and women, with their constituents, as a way they could talk back and forth. When he started this, only 24 congressmen were on Twitter, and what are there, over 400 and so?
435.
435. So he helped drive that, the numbers to go up so that people are communicating on Twitter. I don't think it turned out exactly the way he'd hoped. There's a lot of negativity with trolling and so forth. But what came of it was when Weiner tweeted that picture of himself and then deleted it, he denied it, said that he got hacked. major publications, newspapers, went to my cousin-in-law, Chris Nakrowski, and because they keep records of all the congressman's tweets. So not only did they have an archive of it, but they had what's called the metadata, where they could actually pinpoint the date, time, and location and device it was tweeted from.
Wow.
And proving that he actually did it, and it was the next day after getting that information that he resigned. So I thought that was pretty fascinating.
So your family is responsible for Anthony Weiner's...
Indirectly, yes, absolutely.
Self-destruction. And therefore the breakup of his marriage.
Right.
Well, good job.
Thank you.
No. To add one more thing on here, the New York Post is reporting that Child Protective Services has launched an investigation on Anthony Weiner.
Oh, yeah, this is the weirdest part, is the last picture that's come out shows Anthony Weiner shirtless in his underwear in his bed, tweeting his physique to some woman with his young son next to him in bed, which is just, the whole thing is really gross and creepy. And I mean, again, on multiple levels, this is really wrong and awful, and your heart breaks for his family and even for Anthony Weiner, because he's clearly caught up in something that he himself can't control.
Yeah.
And we do want this to ultimately end in a redemptive story, but it sounds like it's going to get darker before it gets better.
I think so.
Okay, so as we usually end this segment, Josh, do you take this movie, Wiener, to be watched again?
As a movie, yes.
Okay.
As a part of what's going on right now with the whole story, it would be years before I'd watch it again.
Yeah, I same thing. I hope if there is ever a sequel, it's a redemptive one.
It'd be less entertaining, but yeah, probably.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe 20 years from now, his son grows up and cures cancer.
There you go.
And we can have a better association with the name Wiener. Okay, something old, something new, something borrowed. This is where we talk about something from elsewhere, another news source, or whatever, another source of something. So we have an article that, Josh, you found from The Economist.
Yeah, so this is back 3 years ago, The Rise of Documentary Film, The Shocking Truth. And so it's just an article about how documentary films are becoming more popular, films like Wiener, and discussing why that is. I've always been a fan of documentary films. Here are some of the things that they're talking about as to why it is popular is that filmmakers are able to choose or find charismatic characters with naturally dramatic stories, and like a Wiener, where it's one thing that he did what he did. It's another thing that he was a congressman, right? And he was married to someone like Huma, who had ties to Hillary Clinton, and all that was fascinating, right? And so today they can, people want to hear more of those kinds of stories. Documentaries, are dramas that don't feel forced. We're often, a reason a fiction film doesn't work is because someone's writing it and they're trying to drive it, and they have an agenda behind it, and it does feel forced, and which we've kind of talked about that in the past a little bit. But in documentaries, you can find something that is, quote, real, or a true, quote, true story, which people, it's like, it's kind of like a bigger, glamorous 2020 or 48 hours type thing, that we can sit down for 2 hours and enjoy watching.
And there's a lot of different kind of documentaries. Like I was a history major undergrad. I love history. I will often watch historical documentaries about whatever, World War II or George Washington or you name it. And those feel different to me than, say, an Anthony Weiner documentary, which is contemporary and morgan biographically focused, which is then different from a what's his name? Morgan Burlock. What's his name?
The Super Size Me?
Super Size Me guy, which is more of a agenda, almost advocacy type. Morgan Spurlock.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Or a Michael. What's his name? Michael
Moore. No.
Michael Moore. Yeah, Bowling for Columbine.
Right.
Those kinds which are very advocate.
He has an agenda,
agenda-driven kind of. So there's a lot of different kinds of documentaries out there, and I love watching Frontline. You ever watch Frontline?
A little bit.
PBS kind of the documentaries on contemporary news issues or whatever. So But they do seem like there's a lot more out there that are getting our attention.
Well,
is there an economic thing behind that too? It seems like with sequels are easier to make because there's a known audience. Is that are they cheaper? Is that part of the reason?
I think part of it is cost, but as you would say, follow the money, right? Mm-hmm. But they're because they are so popular with things like reality TV. People want to sit down and watch these things. Netflix came out with Making a Murderer, which I don't think you've seen.
I haven't seen it yet.
Have you seen it? So that is an excellent piece of film or television, but it's so sad, and because it is real, I had to stop watching it halfway through. I mean, it is a real downer, but it was intriguing, and I wanted to find out what happened, and things just kept getting worse and worse. What's interesting, though, is that these things are so popular that they drive attention to these things, where there was apparently an innocent victim that went to jail and Making a Murderer, and he was recently released. Now, how much the film had to involve in that, I don't know, but I think because it was given attention, it led to helping him get released. Or this wasn't a film, but did you listen to Serial?
No, but I heard a lot about that too.
Okay, so they call Making a Murderer the television version of Serial, which was a podcast.
An NPR series, right?
Yeah, it was a spinoff from This American Life.
Right.
And that was also about a murder, and it had influences in getting this kid, now an adult, a retrial. Did he really kill this girl or not, and so forth. But
so is this an outgrowth of kind of what emerged in the late 90s, early 2000s with so-called reality TV, just taken to a new level? Where
I think so. I mean, like with Wiener. I mean, I'm literally watching the film. I couldn't sit down and watch it straight through just because of scheduling. And in between it, I'm getting these news articles about he did it again.
Yeah.
Now his wife is leaving. And just now, Jason said an article. So it's like these things can continue beyond the film, like Making a Murderer, where these guys who were the defendant of the character in Making a Murderer, they're on speaking tours right now. These are two lawyers who got this case, and because of the fame of the show, they're now on a speaking tour, right? And so it can go beyond the film, and we can follow it, and it's quote real. So I think we engage in it more because it is more social media-esque.
The reality aspect of it, I find, depends on the type of documentary, because especially when they're advocacy documentaries where you're anti-fast food like the Super Size Me, or you're anti-gun like the Michael Moore Bowling for Columbine, whatever, when there's a very clear agenda, a film inherently, any film is inherently manipulative, right? Because the filmmaker is trying to get you to feel something, to go along with a story, to identify with a character or hate another character or whatever. And that's just a narrative storytelling. But even in a documentary, your editorial decisions, what you show and what you don't show, the music you use, the filter on the lens, all that creates an emotion. So I'm a little bit more suspicious of documentary when it's advocacy based. Even that CNN documentary Blackfish. Did you see that?
No, I read about it.
Yeah,
and this article actually focuses on that film.
Oh yeah, I didn't even notice that picture there. But it's about the captivity of killer whales by SeaWorld. And you watch that and you walk away thinking SeaWorld
is evil.
Is the devil. Right. Like they are evil, and everyone who works for them is either evil or just bought off by evil, right? And then you get a little distance from the film and you realize, okay, there's a problem here with orcas in captivity, but I'm not sure everyone is quite as evil as maybe that film made it out to be. Right. Or, there's always three sides to every story, your side, my side, and the truth. Okay. Right? So you can be so quickly manipulated by the filmmakers and their agenda that it's suspicious. Whereas there are others, maybe the more biographical ones like Wiener or the Making of a Murderer or whatever, where it's a little bit harder to be super manipulative with it because you're just telling one person's story who's actually actively involved in the film itself. Maybe that's a little easier. So I don't know. I love documentaries, but I'm also suspicious of some of them, especially when they're agenda-driven. It
is very, you get to peek behind the curtain in other people's lives, mentality where you get to kind of see something that isn't made up, or, quote, isn't made up. And because we are like that, films have taken it to, I don't know, it's the opposite extreme, but like, for example, the movie Fargo, it opens saying, based on the true story. Fargo is not a true story.
Right.
They just put it in there. And the moment you see that, I go, oh my goodness.
This really happened?
Right. I saw
wood chipper and everything?
Right. I saw the preview. I knew there's this crazy murder and this cop and all that. And so I didn't realize it was true. And so now I'm engaged, more than I was.
This really happened.
Right.
Did you hear about that woman from Korea who thought that was real?
No.
Thought she thought it was like a documentary type thing and that the money was still out there. And so she went out in, where was that set? North Dakota?
Fargo, North Dakota, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but they end up in Minnesota, though.
Yeah. She went out there and she died because she was out in the cold.
Oh, my
trying to
goodness.
find, and she froze to death. And there was a documentary about that, I think from the Zellner brothers.
They made a documentary about a woman who believed it was a documentary.
Yeah.
That's really sad.
Yeah.
She didn't have any underlying mental illness or something?
I've never seen it. I've only ever heard about it. It's just a messed up situation. And she didn't speak English. So she didn't have any way to communicate with anyone. She was going around trying to find like how or where this would be buried and everything, and it wasn't real at all.
That's really messed up.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find the name of the documentary.
What other movies are clearly fake that someone thinks is real?
Well, okay,
Would lead
so
to tragedy?
when I saw
Star Wars, long ago in a galaxy far, far away. Oh, this really happened.
When I saw the movie Hands on a Hardbody, it was in a theater, and the trailer was for the Blair Witch Project.
Oh, yeah.
And this was before the internet was huge and you could just Google on your phone or whatever. And it was meant to be this way. I believed that was real found footage of kids lost in the forest and, no one knows where they are now, right? And I was hooked. Like I don't like horror. I don't watch horror, but I wanted to see this film. And they went as far as this. They actually made another documentary that was on television prior to the film of the release. And so it was about, I guess, the making of the documentary, The Blair Witch Project. And so that was even portrayed as a real documentary.
So there's layers of...
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And so people watch this, me included, like, this is real, this is crazy. Ultimately, by the time you saw it in the theaters, you realized, somehow you found out it wasn't
I've never
real.
seen that movie.
Like I said, I don't like horror, but it was fantastic.
It was Kumiko the Treasure Hunter by David Zellner and Nathan Zellner.
Okay.
And it was actually a dramatic retelling of it, but yeah, it is actually an office worker.
From Tokyo.
From Tokyo, it's not Korea.
Japanese, yeah.
I found in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, found dead. Because she was hunting that treasure. So the movie is Kumiko the Treasure Hunter. I've not seen it. I can't.
This fuzzy line now that's being created between fictional narrative and documentary is interesting. A couple of years ago, if you remember Shark Week on Discovery.
Never seen it, but yes, I hear about it all
You've
the time.
never seen Shark Week?
No.
Oh, I love Shark Week. Love it. Anyway, a couple of years ago, they did a show on Megalodon.
Oh, they're making a movie about Megalodon.
Well, probably in a tornado. So Megalodon, if you don't know, is this extinct shark species that was like 30 times larger than a great white, the largest predatory fish ever to live on Earth. So they did this show on Megalodon, but they did it as a documentary, and it was all speculating on whether or not Megalodon was still out there somewhere, still in the ocean. And they fabricated photographs and they fabricated testimonies, and it was actually all fake. It was all actors, but somebody who didn't know that the internet was something they could double check facts on would walk away. And actually Discovery got a lot of flack for this, of presenting as a documentary something which was really just a fictional farce. Like, there is no evidence that Megalodon is still alive.
Well, that's like, what was that? The radio program, was it War of the Worlds?
War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells. What is it, back in the 1920s?
Yeah.
And people were listening to the invasion from Mars and thinking it was real. So there's a long history of that fuzzy line between documentary and fiction, and a certain percentage of people will fall for it, kind of like a Donald Trump presidency. But I probably just insulted at least 30% of our audience with that, but I'm sorry. Yeah, but I guess it does make for creative filmmaking.
Well, the movie Meg is coming out in 2018.
Meg, M-E-G.
M-E-G, which I think is based on a book. But Jason, how do you say his last name?
Stratham.
And then Rainn Wilson from The Office starring in it.
This is the Megalodon movie?
Yeah. Well, it's a new one. It's a fictional film, obviously.
Clearly.
But it's coming out in a couple years.
All right. We'll look forward to it. Okay. Something old, something new, something borrowed. Our final segment, something blue. This is something that either blew our minds that we've engaged recently or that totally blew chunks. It was terrible. Josh, what's your something blue?
It blew my mind. A series on Netflix called Documentary Now. It's with Bill Hader and Fred Armisen from Saturday Night Live. If you like Portlandia, which is also on Netflix, very similar type of humor and feel to it, but it's 6 mini documentaries, obviously made up, but they're hysterical. If you love that kind of humor, check it out on Netflix.
So you've really kept the documentary theme flowing this whole episode.
Well, Skye, our audience is asking for a theme, and so I'm running with it.
Well, I'm just going with the wedding theme. Right. You played it on multiple levels. That's what I'm looking forward to seeing that though. My something blue is also something that blew my mind. Positive blue. It's a podcast series. I'm sure some of you have already listened to this, but Malcolm Gladwell is one of my favorite writers and speakers. I actually met him, had lunch with him once at a conference we were at together. Great guy. And he has a relatively new podcast series called, what's it called? History. I got to pull it up on my phone. I should have been more prepared.
Oh, man. This is what our listeners don't like.
I know. There's this unprepared blank. I had it in my head, but I'm trying to keep track of too many things.
While I was talking about that, Documentary Now has Helen Mirren. Is it Mirren?
Mirren, yeah.
Host the show. She opens every segment. It looks like it's something straight out of PBS. And they have other guest stars, like Jack Black is in one of them, along with other actors. There's a guy from Don Draper. What show is that?
Oh, yeah.
Mad Men. Not him, but the white-haired guy.
Oh, John Slattery.
Yeah. So a lot of different actors.
How come I can remember that and I couldn't remember Malcolm Gladwell's podcast? Anyway.
But go for it.
It's revisionist history.
Oh, okay.
I think it's only 10 episodes in this first season, and it's great storytelling. He has this great episode about Wilt Chamberlain and the one season where he did his free throws underhanded, like a granny shot, and how he had a much higher success percentage free throw shooting, and why that is actually a preferred way to do free throws, but why no one does it. And it just really, he does 3 episodes about higher education and how our college system is totally whacked up. It's a really, really well done, well-told storytelling. It's great if you're into podcasts. I highly recommend you pick it up.
I'm going to check out the college one first, I think. That sounds good.
There's 3 of them on higher ed and why the system is so ridiculous.
I'm there.
In the U.S. So anyway.
I do want to comment on people that have, thank you for reaching out and making comments on the Patreon site. If you're on other areas, I'm not getting it, but I can see it on Patreon. And first of all, Sam, we asked, what's your favorite portrayal of Jesus in films? Sam King had a hilarious one, which if you're a Patreon subscriber, you can go to the feed and you can find it there. But Jonathan, agreed with Skye's take on the movie. I don't know what he said about
The Last Days in the Desert.
He didn't like that either.
He said, ultimately, I agree with Skye. I think we can end there. That's enough.
Well, I want to point out Jeff Schaefer, who his I think his favorite was Risen, which I have not seen Risen.
I haven't either.
I'm intrigued to see it now because a couple people mentioned it, which Jeff also mentioned a defense for Batman versus Superman, which it desperately needs a strong defense. So thank you, Jeff, for speaking up for the movie. And then Pam, once again, for chiming in.
And he said, going back to Jeff, best depiction of Christ, a toss-up between Jim Caviezel in The Passion and the Christ and Cliff Curtis's fantastic turn in Risen. So he was also kind of between Risen and
Do you have a favorite portrayal?
I really don't. I haven't given it that much thought. Do you?
I have to go with Caviezel and Passion of the Christ simply because, like, come Easter time, I usually find myself where I got a couple hours to kill, and I want to watch this film just kind of...
No pun intended.
Yes, not intended. And so I think it's an excellent film. Obviously, I don't know how historically accurate it is, but
I think
it works for me.
I think Caviezel did do a good job, and the Aramaic is impressive. It's hard for me to say he's a great depiction of Jesus when most of it's just him being bloody, tortured, and killed. It isn't like he's going around doing miracles and preaching, and it's hard to kind of get. I don't know if there's a film depiction of Jesus that really, truly. I always think back to the Jesus of Nazareth.
That's the one. I watch it every year.
Very European with the bright blue eyes.
Yeah,
but I don't think that's highly accurate either. But anyway, we've been all over the map today. Hope you enjoyed the whole episode. Go out and watch Wiener. Give us your thoughts on that as well, especially given the news. And we will be back soon with another episode. So until then, I'm Skye Jethani.
And I'm Josh Lindsey.
And you can kiss this episode goodbye.
Oh, I wish I were an Oscar Mayer Wiener. That is what I truly like to be. You see, for if I were an Oscar Mayer Wiener, everyone would be in love with me. Oh, everyone would be in love with me.